happiness all around the world. A variety of flavors that can be enjoyed anytime, anywhere. Makes your day happier. Always keeps your everyday happiness. My own secret happiness routine. Bonbee.
Your eyes get tired. The blue light. Your peace of mind is disturbed by others' eyes. Now, protect your eye health and inner peace by blocking curious eyes and also the blue light. Wellness starts within the eyes. Anbach Privacy Screen Filters.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 5th, here in South Korea. America is electing its 47th president today, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, some 160 million people are heading to polling stations to cast their vote as the international community awaits the result that will have implications beyond America's borders. And North Korea fires a series of short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea earlier this morning, triggering stern condemnation from South Korea, whose military has described the latest display of defiance as despicable. Meanwhile, the Yoon administration reaffirms commitment to its 4+1 reform framework for education, health, labor, pension and low birth rate as it marks the end of the first half of its term in office. Today, that is November 5th, is Election Day in the U.S., where Americans are voting for their 47th president. Our Choe Soo-hyung starts us off.
Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris and the Republican Party's Donald Trump are making their final push to win the White House. Both candidates held intense rallies in Pennsylvania, one of the battleground states, on November 4th, the day before the presidential election. Vice President Harris campaigned at 5 locations in Pennsylvania, including Scranton and Allentown, and ended her campaign rally in Philadelphia on Monday night.
The race ain't over yet, and we must finish strong, and this could be one of the closest races in history. Every single vote matters.
Former President Trump also held a rally in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania and moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, wrapping up his campaign rally.
With your vote tomorrow, we can fix every single problem our country faces and lead America into the world.
Pennsylvania, which has 19 Electoral College votes, the highest among the 7 swing states in this election, which also include Nevada and Wisconsin, is seen as the most decisive battleground. According to a New York Times poll on November 3rd, both candidates were tied at 48% support, showing an extremely close race up to the last minute. The race for vice presidential candidates were also in full swing. Democratic candidate Tim Walz visited Stevens Point, Wisconsin, a swing state, to rally support for Harris. Starting in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Walz ended his campaigning in Detroit, Michigan. Republican candidate J.D. Vance also held last-minute rallies across battleground states, including Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia. Vance finished his campaign with a rally in Newtown, Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, security has been tightened ahead of the election. To prevent any potential violence, a 2.5-meter iron fence has been placed in front of the White House, and about 100,000 polling places nationwide are under 24-hour surveillance by the FBI. In at least 17 states, including Oregon, Washington, and Nevada, almost 600 National Guard troops are on standby. In this U.S. election, approximately 160 million voters are expected to participate. Choe Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Now, while we await the result of that race in this next report, we share with you some intriguing information about the election in the U.S. The presidential election there is not based on the popular vote. It's based on a system called the Electoral College. Our Park Gonu explains.
The U.S. presidential race is coming to an end. Beginning midnight on November 5th in Dixville Notch, a small village in New Hampshire, the in-person presidential vote will come to a close 25 hours later in Alaska. The U.S. uses the electoral vote instead of a popular vote system, so Tuesday's election is to select the Electoral College, which has a total of 538 votes, made up of 100 senators, 435 congressmen, and 3 electors from Washington, D.C. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump will need at least 270 votes, also called the magic number, to ensure victory. This means that a candidate with more of the popular vote can still be defeated if they receive fewer Electoral College votes. In 2016, Hillary Clinton lost the election to Trump, although she won around 2.9 million more votes. If Harris and Trump are tied on 269 votes, their fate will be decided by the House of Representatives in early January. The number of Electoral College votes differs by state based on the size of its congressional delegation, with states with bigger populations getting more electoral votes. For example, California, which has the largest population, has a total of 54 electoral votes, because California has 2 senators and 52 congressmen, while Wyoming, with the smallest population, has just 3, because it has 2 senators and 1 congressman. Most of the states follow the winner-takes-it-all rule, where the candidate who earns more votes within a state takes the whole electoral college. But Maine and Nebraska split their electoral votes, giving 2 to the state popular vote winner, and 1 vote for the winner in each of the state's congressional districts. After the Electoral College is elected, they'll participate in a ceremonial vote on December 17th, while the next U.S. president will be inaugurated on January 20th next year. With the poll results for the past several weeks showing a tight race, particularly in the 7 swing states, including Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, it remains too close to call. And with the number of variables that could slow the process, including delays in counting mail-in votes as each state verifies tickets at different dates, and a possible recount in the case of a narrow victory, it could be as long as 2 weeks before we see a winner. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
And as we've said before, the result of the U.S. presidential race will have implications that go beyond its borders. That being said, our foreign affairs correspondent Peunji takes a look at the prospects of partnership between Seoul and Washington, as well as their efforts to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula under a new U.S. leadership.
The 2 candidates, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, have starkly differing views on how to share the cost for American troops stationed in Korea. In an op-ed to South Korean local media, Harris said the alliance between Seoul and Washington has been a linchpin of security and prosperity, while noting that South Korea is already paying sizable contributions to have American troops in the country. Last month, the 2 countries reached a deal on this issue after going through 5 months of negotiation. Whereas Harris will likely stick to this agreement, Trump has hinted at an attempt to renegotiate, saying Washington cannot be taken advantage of any longer in military and trade. He's been insisting that Seoul should be paying $10 billion a year, describing South Korea as a money machine. Many experts say that South Korea needs to be prepared for renegotiation should Trump take office again.
So, I think that we could definitely see an attempt to renegotiate the special measures agreement. That could cause alliance friction. I think that we could see a Trump administration attempt to try to repurpose the USFK, so the U.S. Forces Korea, to be postured more flexibly to deal with regional contingencies. And by that, one mostly understands a potential problem.
The 2 candidates also plan to take notably different approaches on how to deal with North Korea. Experts suggest that if Harris wins, we will see the new administration focus on strengthening relations with allies and partners to address nuclear threats from North Korea.
For Harris, denuclearization of North Korea remains the ultimate goal, but what's more important is working with allies to deter the North. So she will continue to focus on strengthening deterrence against North Korea's nuclear program by reassessing and enhancing cooperation with allied nations.
But a second Trump presidency could pose a significant risk for South Korea.
Trump will likely try to manage the North Korean nuclear crisis through a top-down diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. Going further, there is a possibility that he may recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state and partially or fully lift sanctions, initiating a nuclear arms reduction negotiation. This could potentially become a significant risk factor for South Korea.
However, both the Democratic and Republican parties have removed the term CVID, or Complete Verifiable Irreversible Denuclearization, in their new policy platforms. While it is too early to say that this fully reflects the new administration's policies, it raises speculation that the U.S. government may be shifting its priorities away from North Korea. The South Korean government says it's ready to respond appropriately, regardless of the outcome of the election. 배은지, Arirang News.
North Korea has fired a round of short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea earlier on this Tuesday morning. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil has details.
The South Korean military has condemned North Korea's recent provocations, labeling them as despicable and warning that such actions will only isolate the regime further, effectively turning it into a, quote, harsh prison. On Tuesday morning, North Korea fired several short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea, launched from the Sariwon area in Hwanghae-bukdo province at around 7:30 a.m. The missiles traveled approximately 400 kilometers in what was North Korea's second missile test in just 5 days, following the launch of the new Hwasong-19 intercontinental ballistic missile on Thursday.
These missile launches are a blatant disregard for UN Security Council resolutions and pose a significant threat, escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. We will once again warn that North Korea will bear full responsibility for the consequences of their actions.
Tuesday's missile launch followed joint air drills by South Korea, the U.S., and Japan over the weekend. In response, Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, warned that these drills pose a serious threat to North Korea and highlight the need for the regime to enhance its defense capabilities.
These launches are a direct response to recent joint air drills by South Korea, the US, and Japan, while also signaling North Korea's presence ahead of the US presidential election.
Professor Kim Jae-chun of Seogang University adds that these provocations may also be intended to influence the election.
This is to remind the U.S. of the fact that they are still a power to be reckoned with, and maybe to help Donald Trump a little bit in this tight race to have a nuclear arms reduction talk with Donald Trump if Donald Trump goes back to the White House.
He added that Pyongyang may also want to show its military readiness despite recently sending troops to Russia. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
And speaking of North Korean soldiers, their first armed confrontation against Ukrainian troops has reportedly taken place in the Kursk region. Our Lee Sing-jae has the latest.
Ukrainian authorities said Monday that the first North Korean troops deployed to Russia have already been attacked by its military in Kursk. According to Ukrainian media outlet RBC Ukraine, the first clash with North Korean troops has taken place, but details of damage suffered by the North Koreans were not disclosed. The reports come as Kyiv said last week that North Korean troops have not yet participated in the war, but would be joining the fight soon. Meanwhile, according to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Monday, 11,000 North Korean troops are already stationed in Kursk. According to Reuters, Zelensky made this statement during a speech where he noted that he received a report on the North Korean troop movement from his intelligence team. The latest figure by Zelensky is greater than Kyiv's previous estimate. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine announced on Saturday that some 7,000 North Korean troops were deployed on the Ukrainian border as of the end of last month. Zelensky said despite an increase in the number of North Korean soldiers, the response from its allies has not increased, expressing regret that Western allies are not responding more actively. Washington, on the other hand, says as many as 10,000 North Korean troops are on Russia's western front line. According to U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller on Monday, the deployed troops could engage in combat in the coming days, but he could not confirm whether or not the North Korean soldiers are already in combat. The Pentagon said between 11,000 to 12,000 North Korean troops could be deployed to Russia, including around 10,000 already in Kursk. It added that the total number of North Korean personnel, including factory workers, to assist Moscow in its war could go up slightly.
이승재, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met with North Korean top diplomat Choe Son-hee in Moscow. Now, this is according to Russian state media. Putin welcomed Choe at the Kremlin on Monday, during which she relayed North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's well wishes. Choe has been in Russia for about a week, having arrived in the port of Vladivostok last Tuesday on a second trip to the country in 6 weeks. Back on the local front, a public presidential address and a press conference will be held this coming Thursday morning to share the administration's policy gains as well as a host of allegations by the opposition party. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon will deliver a public address and press conference at 10 a.m. this Thursday as he marks the midpoint of his presidency this week. A senior presidential official said Monday that the South Korean leader will explain what he's achieved so far and the direction of his policies in the remainder of his term. This will be Yoon's first press conference in about 2.5 months since the end of August. The format will likely follow the same structure as his most recent press conference, with the president delivering a national address first, followed by a Q&A session with reporters. According to the senior aide, Yoon will address all questions regarding matters of public interest. This could well include recent allegations that he and First Lady Kim Gon-hee may have interfered in party politics in 2022. The opposition party last month leaked a recorded phone call between Yoon and Myung Tae-gyun, an obscure political consultant, during which they discussed the ruling party's candidate selection process ahead of a by-election. Initially, the presidential office was leaning towards holding the press conference around the end of the month, following Yoon's diplomatic engagements, but the leader reportedly took his aide's advice to make a public address before his overseas trip. It appears the date was moved up after Yoon's approval ratings dropped below 20% last week, and the opposition steps up its offensive against First Lady Kim, vowing to pass a bill mid-month to launch a special investigation against her. Throughout his term, Yoon has been targeted with various accusations surrounding his wife's alleged misconduct and influence over his administration and personnel. His office has expressed hope that the upcoming press conference will bring clarity through Yoon's comprehensive explanations to the public. As he marks the halfway point of his term, the president's tone and rhetoric on Thursday could mark an inflection point in the domestic political landscape. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, as mentioned, the Yoon administration is advancing into the second half of its 5-year term, and in light of this occasion, his top aides met with the presidential press poll to share the achievements thus far and the work ahead. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Reaching the halfway mark of President Yoon Suk-yeol's term in 1 week, the top domestic policy aides for President Yoon took time on Tuesday to explain what had been done so far and what the nation can expect for the second half. The 4+1 reforms, labor, education, medical, and pension, plus a low birth rate, were the first things emphasized as they have been and will continue to be top of the agenda for President Yoon.
Supporting our children to grow into creative talents from fair competitions and enabling them to work in the fields they aspire to, ensuring that all of our citizens can receive high-quality healthcare anytime, anywhere, and live without concerns about their retirement. This is the essence of the 4 major reforms.
The Chief of Staff for Policy said the key to all the reforms, however, was overcoming the current demographic crisis. The low birth rate has been an issue for the nation for a while, and there have been positive signs with the recent slight jump in the fertility rate and number of marriages. The goal is to reach a fertility rate of 1 by 2030.
We request the special attention and cooperation of the National Assembly for the swift passage of relevant laws, including the Government Organization Act, to enable the rapid establishment of the Population Strategy Planning Department, which will serve as a control tower in addressing the population crisis.
Second was the economy, while the economic indicators such as gross national income, which surpassed Japan for the first time this year, and inflation rate at 1.6% for September are low compared to other OECD members. Actual living for citizens has not been easy, especially for many small business owners. An official also said there will be more budget allocated for small business owners and their financial burdens from debt as part of the efforts. Other topics the top office covered were future resources, safe environment, and fostering regions outside the capital. The occasion is being used to show the administration motivation to finish the term strong.
However, none of this can be achieved without the support of our citizens. Legislative tasks also require active cooperation from the National Assembly.
This briefing marked the beginning of a three-part series of the top office's efforts to reach out to the public in light of its halfway mark. The second part will be on Wednesday, a briefing solely on diplomacy and national security. And the finale, of course, the president himself on Thursday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In other news, inflation in the month of October stayed within the 1% range on year, noting its slowest momentum in some 4 years. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
Consumer prices in South Korea showing signs of stabilizing, with inflation remaining in the 1% range for the second straight month in October. Data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 1.3% compared to the same month the previous year. The on-year rise is also the lowest seen since January 2021. The rise in consumer prices had been in the 2% range since April, before dropping to 1.6% in September. The slowing of inflation last month was mainly driven by the cost of petroleum products falling 10.9% on year, marking the sharpest drop in 15 months.
The drop in prices of petroleum and fruit products was greater, lowering the rise in consumer prices in October 2024 by 0.3 percentage points from the previous month to 1.3% on year.
Fruit prices fell more than 10% on year in October, with apple prices plunging 20%. But overall prices of agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products were up 1.2% on year. Vegetables in particular saw a sharp rise, jumping 15.6% compared to the same month the year before, the highest seen since October 2022. Key ingredients of kimchi, an important staple of Korean cuisine, remained high, with prices of Napa cabbages up 51.5% on year and radishes up 52.1%. To address the high prices, the first Vice Minister of Economy and Finance at a Vice Ministerial Economic meeting on Tuesday said that the government will carry out measures to stabilize vegetable prices.
The supply of Napa cabbages will go up 10% compared to the previous year to 24,000 tons. And starting from October 24, there were discounts of up to 40% on cabbages and radishes to alleviate the burden on consumers.
The Bank of Korea, which also held a meeting on Tuesday to evaluate prices, assessed that while prices are stabilizing, consumer price inflation may return to the 2% range towards the end of the year due to base effect from low oil prices at the end of last year, as well as a result of the U.S. election. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Korea's age-old practice of making fermented sauces known as jang in Korean is likely to be listed as an intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. Now, jang is based on soybean and includes 3 key varieties, namely doenjang, 간장, and gochujang, which define the identity of Korean cuisine. According to UNESCO, its deliberative body made the related recommendation after assessing the belief, knowledge, and practice of making jang. Recommendations for inscriptions are rarely overturned. The final decision will be shared after a meeting in Paraguay in December. The song 아파트 by Roger from BLACKPINK and American pop star Bruno Mars has topped US Billboard global charts for the second week in a row after its release on October 18th. According to Billboard on social platform X, the song ranked first on both the Billboard Global 200 and the Billboard Global Chart, which excludes the US. The Billboard Global Charts rank the week's most popular songs based on online streaming and digital sales worldwide.
This This morning was the coldest this fall in the central parts of the country. Although it is an official figure, some places in center inland areas were at below zero, with temperature in Panmunjom near Paju, Gyeonggi-do province falling to minus 0.7 degrees Celsius. According to official records, Cheoran in Gangwon-do province fell to 1.9 degrees and Gangwon-do Island in Incheon to 3.7 degrees. The East Coast will be cloudy with 5 to 20 millimeters of rain until night. In the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, where temperatures are low, about 2 centimeters of snow has accumulated. Please be careful because there may be slippery roads. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at 1 degree, Daejeon 3 degrees. Highs will move up to 11 degrees in Seoul, Gwangju and Daegu 14 degrees. This cold will gradually ease with temperatures recovering from the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Do stay with us for our daily panel session coming up next.
천혜의 자연관광지와 이순신 장군의 충절의 정신이 공존하는 경상남도에서 푸르드 경남 2014 스페셜 대회가 펼쳐집니다. 약속의 땅, 미래 100년의 도시 통영. 일상이 여행인 그곳, 다정다감 거제. 매력발산 천만 생태 관광도시 국민고향 보물섬 남해. 변화와 혁신을 선도하는 도시 창원. 아름다운 경남 남해안의 관광지를 투어하는 푸르드 경남 스페셜 대회에 여러분의 많은 관심 바랍니다.
How to survive in Korea. Weddings. Step 0. Attire. As a guest, dress formal to business casual. Avoid wearing all white, shorts or going topless. Step 1. Arrival time. Arrive 30 minutes prior to the wedding ceremony. Too many cars, too many halls, too many people. There are many twists and turns. Take pictures and shake hands. And write your name vertically, not horizontally, in the guest book. Step 2. Or, shib, shibor. 50,000 won, 100,000 won, 150,000 won. Cash gifts are given in these units. Decide on the amount based on your relationship. Write your name vertically on the envelope. Step 3. Wedding etiquette. Fill up the front row. Guests have 3 duties to fulfill: clapping, cheering, and taking pictures. Step 4. Dining. Take off your jacket. This will be your seat from now on. Start with the not your everyday delicacies. Kalbijjim. Yes. Bosa. Yes. Chili shrimps. Definitely yes. Kimbap. Yeah. Only if you can't live without it. No need to pile up food. You have more than one opportunity. Did you survive the wedding? Wait. Did someone catch your eye? What are you waiting for? You're looking fine today.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지.
제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기.
한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지?
김치? 종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색.
김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥? 취향 따라, 입맛 따라.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
Will the U.S. see the return of Donald Trump to the White House? Or will the country usher in its first female leadership under Kamala Harris? Against the backdrop of this big question, on Press Perspective today, we touch upon the implications of the next U.S. administration on security here in Asia. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome. It's Tuesday, November 5th here in South Korea, and I'm Min Sun-hee. The U.S. election is taking place today, and as the world awaits the result of this latest presidential race, we delve into the diplomatic impact of the new U.S. administration on regional security. For this, I have Thomas Maresca from American news agency UPI. Thomas, as always, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I also have Yang Chen-hao, a freelance journalist from Taiwan. Chen-hao, welcome back.
Hello, glad to be here too.
Right, Thomas, let's begin off then with some of the latest facts about early voting in the U.S.
Right. Early voting has been strong. The turnout, I think the last number I saw was around 82 million early ballots have been cast, which would be more than half of the total votes. In 2020, there was around 155 million total votes. So strong turnout among early voting. Not as high as 2020 because that was it was in the midst of the COVID pandemic, so there was a much higher than usual mail-in voting and ballot drop box type of voting. But beyond that, it's hard to really extract, conclusions about what this means. Partly because it's much higher than normally, pre-COVID, but the COVID pandemic changed a lot of early voting rules, so it's higher, but there's no real baseline to kind of measure what this means against. Generally in the past, I think turnout and early voting turnout has been a positive sign for Democrats, but this year, in some states, especially, there's a much higher than usual Republican turnout, so that could be a strong sign for Republicans. I think some of the real key areas that analysts and poll watchers and the campaigns are looking at are sort of some of the crucial voter groups and how they're breaking out, from age, gender, ethnic, and just other demographics, but particularly, I think gender is really becoming one of the big stories of this election. And so far in the early voting, women have been outpacing men by something like 10 percentage points. It's something like 54 to 44 in the overall early voting, which it will remain to be seen if men can make up that gap, but that would also be a strong sign for the Democrats and Harris in this case, because women, this election has also grown strongly gender divided. Women are much more strongly supporting Harris, and men are much more strongly supporting Trump. So that's one sign that people are looking at, but it's still, at this point, generally speaking, all the polls have it as kind of a toss-up. It's really hard to draw any conclusions.
And speaking about the polls, Thomas, one of the latest ones apparently shows Kamala Harris leading in the state of Iowa, and quite a number of American media outlets have been covering this finding. Why is this reality so relevant?
Yeah, this was sort of the bombshell of this last weekend before the election. It dropped on Saturday night from the Des Moines Register, and it had Harris up 47 to 44 for Trump in Iowa, which is a strongly Republican state. Trump won in 2020 by something like 7 points, and also in 2016 by something like 7 or 8 points, and was winning in prior polling up until this point. But the reason that this has gotten so much attention is that the pollster is a woman named Ann Seltzer, who's considered really one of the best and most accurate pollsters, and she's been really on the money in the previous elections and some other midterm elections. So her poll is definitely an outlier, but she has so much credibility that people are paying a lot of attention to it. And Iowa itself is not the biggest state and wouldn't necessarily have that much of an impact on the election, but if that trend were to hold, that would spell sort of disaster for Trump in neighboring states probably, and sort of key upper Midwest swing states like Wisconsin and Michigan. There would be some sense that the same trends would continue over there. And really what Seltzer, and this highlights as well what I was mentioning about the gender issue, is that what Seltzer was highlighting and finding these numbers is that there's just a really strong late break towards Harris from women, especially older women over 65 and independents that hadn't, were not registered Democrat or Republican. And they've gone so strongly towards Harris. And one of the key issues in this campaign, and this may turn out to be perhaps the most salient issue, is something that happened between 2020 and 2024 was the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, which allowed the constitutional right for abortion. And that's become a tremendous issue, and a lot of states are implementing their own abortion restrictions, and Iowa is one of them that's implemented a really strict ban and restriction. And so women have come out in response to this. It's not even just about sort of abortion per se, but even reproductive health rights. There have been some very high-profile stories recently. ProPublica just did one of women dying because they were not able to get timely treatment, having a miscarriage, because the laws have been so restrictive about what doctors can do. So this has been a very salient issue all the way along. So if this poll holds true, or kind of spells the trend, that would make perhaps this the key issue in this election that will decide this election. But we'll still see.
We'll have to wait and see, though. Chen Hao, in the meantime, what can you share with us about the coverage of the U.S. election in Taiwan? I mean, what aspects of the presidential election in the U.S. is making headlines in Taiwan?
So the core issue will be how much will the new U.S. government support Taiwan, and how will the new president, how hard or how tough will the new president deal with China? When Trump was first being elected in 2016, many people in Taiwan were worried indeed. He's just like crazy guy, so he's unpredictable. Will he hurt Taiwan? That's all we concerned. I remember several days after the election, I've met a brand and strategist from the President Tsai Ing-wen, who has just left the office 6 months ago. I met one of her team charging and researching the diplomacy, and I still remember what he told me. He said that, don't worry, Chen Hao, we need to calm down. Surprisingly, you will know that there will be many pro-Taiwan politicians or staffs joining Trump's team, and it will be a very good chance for Taiwan. And later, it proved to be true. We could see President Trump, later he had phone talk with President Tsai Ing-wen, and he directly sent his message, strong message, negative attitude, and criticized on China for several times. We can see also he launched the trade war, taxing and tariffing the merchandise importing from China, and approving the bill allowing the mutual visits for the United States officials and Taiwanese officials. And also, the United States government has sold more weapons to Taiwan, which is more than the total amount of the 16 years from President Bush to President Obama's term. Indeed, if you look at the total, the trade volume between the United States and China, it grew more during Trump's term, which means that indeed, actually, China and the United States, each other, they're relying more. But for Taiwanese, what many people want to see is a president who can take strong stance, tough attitude toward the Beijing authority. Even just several words is enough. And Trump did it, and he did more than that. So that's why 4 years ago when Trump was seeking for the second term, you can see Taiwan is nearly the only country in the world which like over 50% of the people, they are supporting Trump and hope that Trump can win again. He failed to do so, but fortunately, President Biden continued the stance of the anti-China and has promised to send troops to protect Taiwan if China really invades. And we can imagine that if Kamala Harris succeed Biden, the stand of anti-China might be maintained, possibly, and the United States will seek strengthen to the multilateral cooperation in defense against China. But if it's for Trump, we think that it will be a little bit different this time because those so-called pro-Taiwan staffs, those members in his team, were they all left. Like for example, the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and the National Security Advisor John Bolton. They were all support Taiwan so much, but they all left. They have arguments with President Trump, and they already left the team. So Trump, you can see he's very unpredictable, and we believe that he will still be tough this time toward China, but since his people are all gone, and this time based on his keynote of American First policy, seeking unilateralism and also protectionism, he will also very likely want to get more things from Taiwan this time, meanwhile bargaining with Beijing. That will make the current Lai Ching-te government in Taipei very difficult to deal with.
Right. Keeping in mind what Chin Hao has just said then, Thomas, and of course keeping in mind the situation here on the Korean Peninsula as well, if I were to ask you, if Asia could vote, which candidate do you suppose would be the preferred nominee?
Well, I think, if you're talking about the citizens themselves, my impression would be Harris over Trump. I don't know how well people know Harris in the region, but I think Trump has generally not that favorable of a popularity rating in most countries from what I've seen of Pew Research and other polls. And I think some of Trump's popularity doesn't really translate outside of America. He's very specific with his appeal, his sort of grievances, his specific culture issues that don't make maybe a lot of sense to people watching from afar who just sort of see this unpredictable, chaotic character. I think if you're asking who do the governments want to see win, also country by country, if you want to look at Northeast Asia specifically, I would say, no one would say it aloud, but I'm pretty sure that South Korea and Japan would certainly prefer a Harris presidency, mainly to maintain, I think the idea was she would certainly maintain the policies of the Biden administration, which has seen a strengthening trilateral security alliance. Certainly, U.S. and South Korea have really ramped up their military partnership. And I think, for the Yoon administration, he has changed, he has directed South Korea's foreign policy sort of in this sense of becoming a bigger part of the liberal democratic world order and having a kind of a values-based diplomacy. And, this fits in more with that framework. And whereas Trump has, always been much more transactional about his foreign policies and has specifically often criticized South Korea for not paying enough for, maintaining the U.S. troops here. He said recently, he called South Korea a money machine and said he'd be getting $10 billion a year from them, whereas it's currently it's around 1.1 billion per year for the cost-sharing agreement. I think Japan is relatively in a similar situation as far as wanting to maintain this alliance and this relationship with the U.S. I think an interesting question is, what does China want? We've heard what China thinks Taiwan is interested in. I think there's two sides from China. On the one hand, you could see, yes, Trump has started the tariff trade war with them, and he has said in some interviews, he would instantly apply like 60% tariffs to China, which would obviously probably not be great for them. But also at the same time, a lot of his policies could be seen as beneficial for China's bigger geopolitical picture, especially if he weakens alliances, not just in Northeast Asia, but around the world. That gives China a lot more room to operate. And Trump may roll back some policies that the Biden administration has implemented, like the CHIPS and Science Act, which is bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S., and just the sort of chaos and unpredictability. I think most liberal democratic countries don't want to see that come, but there's a transactional kind of opportunity for one-on-one relationships, Trump has said how much he admires Xi. Similarly with Kim Jong-un, I would say North Korea probably would also prefer to see Trump, where there's a sense of we can make deals outside of this whole framework of the international order. So it's more like a high-risk, high-reward situation when you look at China.
And staying with some of the remarks made by Mr. Trump, Chin Hao, Mr. Trump claims that Taiwan stole America's chip industry. What does he mean?
That was during the interview with the Bloomberg Business Week. Like Trump, he mentioned that Taiwan did take 100% of the U.S. chip business, and Taiwan should pay U.S. for defense. It's no different than an insurance company because Taiwan did not give United States anything. Indeed, Taiwan is producing over 90% of the high-level, very advanced microchips for the world, especially on foundry. For example, for those big companies such as Apple, they have their own chip designs, but they don't own their factories. That means that they are not able to have mass productions because that costs too much. And from the end of 1980s, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, as you know, the TSMC, partly supported by the government in the beginning, instead of having its own brand, its own design, TSMC has focused on building up the factories, raising its ability to the original designing manufacturing, so-called the ODM. That means that the customers, they send the designs to TSMC, and TSMC, they produce the chips according to the design and then send back to the customers. And till now, the TSMC holds like 62% of the foundry market share around the world, which touches the most. But it's not Taiwan stealing it, I need to say. It's because the American companies, they are not affordable to manufacture the chips for themselves, because building up the factories, they will need tons of waters and electricities, and they need to hire the very high professional staffs managing it and maintain the security. That just costs way too much. And Taiwan is able to do that because TSMC have invested and have its own techniques manufacturing. It's something to do with professional services and specialization, and making it cost less when manufacturing, so it will bring more profits to the customers. That I'm not trying to emphasize how great TSMC is, and I'm not trying to emphasize how fantastic Taiwan is. No, we are just a very small country. We need help, and we need more support from the other countries, and we do want to have cooperation with around the world. But what I want to mention is, without TSMC, those American companies like Apple, they wouldn't be able to grow. So what Trump said is totally not based on the truth, and it's very nonsense. It's very problematic, and it's very populism.
Chen Hao, as our Thomas mentioned earlier, it's not just South Korea that Mr. Trump wants to pay more for U.S. protection, if you will. Trump has also asserted that Taiwan must pay more for U.S. protection. How much has he asked for?
If he's talking about the money, I'm not able to predict. But as I've mentioned, that during Trump's term, serving as the president, the United States have already sold tons of weapons to Taiwan, charging like $18 billion, which was more than the total sum of President Bush and Obama's term. And during the 4 years of Biden's administration, it has been maintaining into the level of $5 billion. Trump is a businessman. I think he cares more about the quid pro quo, or we can say the reciprocate, instead of the United States being asked to do this or to do that for free. I think, based on my opinion, for Taiwan, in some extent, that does make sense. Before asking others to help us, I think Taiwanese need to show our strong will, or so-called volition, against China, and try to let everybody know that we really take this very seriously, to let the United States know that it will be valuable protecting us, defending not only our democracy, and also maintaining the global supply chain and the geopolitical balance. And based on that, raising the vigilance and the ability of self-defense of Taiwan itself. itself will be definitely important. If we are not able to show that, then the United States will think that, oh, Taiwan is not active and it will cost too much and the result might not be good either. Then it will make the United States take less effort on it. That's what we need to learn from the past case of U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. God helps those who help themselves.
Right. Thomas, quite a number of pundits have taken issue with Mr. Trump's tendency to make U.S. allies feel vulnerable. He's also asked NATO members to boost their defense spending, or he would, and I quote, let Russia do whatever it wants to do to them. How does this tendency to make his U.S. partners feel vulnerable look to affect the sense of unity against geopolitical challenges like the war in Ukraine as well as that in the Middle East?
I think there's a lot of concern. When you look at NATO, there's been tons of discussions about sort of this so-called Trump-proofing, NATO and NATO's aid to Ukraine. And, and the caveat, I guess, is that there's always this sense of unpredictability about what Trump might do, and he is so transactional, and if there's a way he sees something that could benefit him, maybe he would find a reason to support Ukraine more. But I think from all the signals that we've seen and his basic proclivity towards supporting Putin and, speaking highly of Putin, he's given a lot of messages that, he sort of blamed Zelensky for starting the war, and he's called Zelensky a salesman, and he said he would stop the war within 24 hours, which, basically would mean capitulating to a lot of Russian demands and, maybe freezing where the battle lines are. His running mate, vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance has outlined something similar to that strategy already, just stopping the battle lines where they are, which would leave Russia with a huge chunk of Ukraine that it currently occupies. So NATO is trying to put some, a lot of the countries have ramped up their own defense spending, and they're trying to coordinate more closely together with some of their abilities to requisition weapons and provide to Ukraine. But I think, depending on how much U.S. pulls back, there's no way that Ukraine could sustain this war. And I mean, that spills around the world. We've seen Russia and North Korea's alliance grow strongly. So if you have a strengthened Russia who can regroup, it's kind of foolish to think, oh, they'll just stop and everything will go back to normal, once they regain their strength, especially if the U.S. is not showing, a strong position against them and is weakening alliances. I mean, China will take a message from that as well. And, so I think the concern extends around the globe. Again, there's some sense maybe you can make a deal with Trump somehow on the sideline. I know Zelensky and some Ukrainians have tried to say, oh, there's, Ukraine has a lot of mineral resources that are quite valuable. So, I guess there's always that hope. But by most of the signs we've seen, I think a lot of the world is trying to prepare for a Trump, if Trump were to win, to kind of future-proof. I mean, South Korea has done it too. They signed a 5-year cost-sharing agreement with the U.S. in October before Trump took power to try and keep him from, radically raising the demand for the prices. But there's also the sense Trump could just try to rip that up and start over again. So I think, no small bit of concern about the future of alliances and the sort of global order.
Right. And Chen Hao, very briefly speaking, because I believe we have like about 40 seconds left, what are your thoughts with regard to the possibility of an armed confrontation within the Taiwan Strait?
Many experts are now predicting that it might happen around like 2027 because it will be the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army's establishment, the PLA. So many people think that, and also it will be another 4-year term of President Xi Jinping. Yeah, so he might need to achieve something. So it will have, that's very possible for like China to invade Taiwan. But the problem is, if China is really able to handle that, if the sacrifice or the damage is too harsh, too severe, and it's not worthy, right? So think about it. If like the semiconductor, those factories is being destroyed, that will also affect not only Taiwan but also China and the world's economy. Like it's estimated that it will drop from like 10 or 15% of the GDP. That will cause it's just like a disaster. It will be like irreversible. Yeah. So the problem is like we need to raise up the sacrifice or the cost for China to invade Taiwan.
Right, to make sure that that does not happen in the future, of course. All right, and I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your insights today. And Thomas, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for Press Perspective today. Do join us again, same time tomorrow.
Completely new. But some